At 6:47 a.m. on August 12, 1943, Staff Sergeant Thomas Brennan knelt beside the left aileron of a P-38 Lightning at Dobodura Airfield in New Guinea, watching Lieutenant Carl Jensen climb into the cockpit for what would likely be his last mission. Jensen was 22 years old, fresh from Sacramento, 7 combat sorties under his belt, 0 victories. The Japanese had 19 Zeros patrolling the skies over Leh that morning. Jensen would be flying straight into them. Brennan had been maintaining P-38s for 11 months. He knew every rivet, every bolt, every cable in those birds. The Lightning was a magnificent machine. Twin engines, twin booms, capable of 400 miles per hour in level flight. At altitude, nothing could touch it. But the P-38 had a killer flaw that was bleeding American pilots dry every single day. It couldn't roll with a Zero. The Zero was lighter, nimbler. In a turning fight, it could roll inverted and reverse direction in the time it took a P-38 pilot to think about moving his stick. American doctrine was clear. Never turn with a Zero. Use speed, use altitude, dive in fast, shoot, climb out, hit and run tactics only. Don't get caught in a dogfight. Jensen had tried following that doctrine 6 times. 6 missions, 0 kills, 3 bullet holes in his aircraft, and a wingman who came home in a body bag. The doctrine wasn't working because the Zeros weren't cooperating. They baited American pilots into turns, exploited the P-38's sluggish roll rate, got on their 6, finished them. The 5th Air Force had lost 42 P-38s in the past 7 weeks. Most were shot down after being caught in turning engagements they couldn't escape from. Brennan had watched too many boys die. Kids, really. They walked out to their aircraft with confidence painted on their faces and came back as statistics or didn't come back at all. The first pilot Brennan lost was 2nd Lieutenant David Kowalski, July 15, 1943. Kowalski was from Detroit, 21 years old, talked constantly about his kid sister back home. He took off at dawn on a fighter sweep and came back 2 hours later with 4 cannon holes in his left boom. Told Brennan that a Zero had gotten inside his turn, that his Lightning felt slow to respond, like his control inputs were fighting through molasses. Kowalski said he pulled the stick hard, right to roll away and dive, but the airplane hesitated, just a fraction of a second. But that fraction was enough for the Zero pilot to get perfect deflection. Only reason Kowalski survived was his wingman killing the Zero before it could finish the job. 3 weeks later, Kowalski was dead. Different aircraft, same problem. Caught in a turn over Wewak, couldn't roll out fast enough. The second pilot was Captain Richard Morrison. Morrison was experienced, a flight leader with 9 confirmed kills. He knew the P-38's limits, flew smart, followed doctrine perfectly. On July 29th, his flight intercepted 6 Zeros at 14,000 feet. Morrison got one on the first pass, came around for another run. 3 Zeros reversed on him. Morrison called on the radio that his controls felt mushy, that the airplane wasn't responding right. His wingman watched him try to roll inverted and split S away. The maneuver looked slow, delayed. The Zeros stayed with him through the dive, shot him down at 5,000 feet. Morrison died on impact. His crew chief, a sergeant named Rodriguez from El Paso, was convinced something was wrong with the aircraft. Rodriguez checked everything after they recovered the wreckage. Engine settings, control rigging, cable tensions. Everything was within specification, nothing mechanically wrong. The official report said pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did Brennan. By early August, Brennan had watched 19 pilots die or get shot down. He'd worked on all their aircraft, signed off their maintenance logs, watched them taxi out for missions they might not survive. The ones who came back all told the same story. The P-38 felt slow in hard maneuvering, like there was a lag between control input and aircraft response. Most pilots thought that was just how the Lightning handled. Heavy fighter, big control surfaces, some delay was expected. But Brennan knew that wasn't normal. The problem was the aileron cables. The P-38's aileron control system ran from the cockpit stick through a series of pulleys and fairleads in the central nacelle, then split to run through each boom out to the wing ailerons. The system used steel cables under tension. When the pilot moved the stick, the cables pulled or pushed on the aileron control horns, moving the surfaces, but the cables had slack in them. Not much, maybe a 1/4 inch at full deflection. The maintenance manual said that was within tolerance. Factory specs allowed for it. But that tiny bit of slack created a delay. The stick moved, the slack had to be taken up, then the ailerons moved. At high speed, the delay was negligible. At low speed, during hard turning maneuvers, that quarter-inch of slack was the difference between rolling inside a zero's turn and getting killed. Brennan had mentioned this to the engineering officer 6 weeks ago. The officer said cable tension was within specifications. Changing it would void the aircraft warranty. Besides, field mechanics didn't have authorization to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval from Lockheed, and Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in Burbank, California, so the pilots kept dying. On the evening of August 11th, Lieutenant Jensen found Brennan in the maintenance area. Jensen's hands were shaking. He'd just come back from a mission where he'd watched his element leader get shot down by a Zero that had outturned him. Jensen asked Brennan if there was anything at all, that could make his lightning roll faster. Jensen said he didn't care about regulations, he just wanted a chance to survive. Brennan looked at Jensen and saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change, saw the fear, the desperation, saw every other pilot who'd asked the same question and was now dead. Brennan told Jensen to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. That night, Brennan worked alone. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of engine oil and tropical decay. Distant thunder rumbled over the Owen Stanley Range. He pulled the inspection panel off Jensen's P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's heat. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail. Brennan grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled, felt the slack. Quarter-inch of play before the tension caught. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The solution came from a damaged P-38 that had ground-looped 2 weeks earlier. Brennan had salvaged parts before the wreck went to the depot. One of those parts was an 8-inch length of high-tensile steel cable from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag without knowing why. Now he knew. He sat on the hangar floor with the cable and a pair of pliers, bending it into a tight S shape. The cable was stiff, fought back. His hands were already sore from a full day's work. The pliers slipped twice, cut his palm on the second try. Blood made the steel slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. The S-shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to eliminate the slack without overstressing the system. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was cramped. Brennan had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with his teeth. The beam kept moving. Shadows danced across the pulleys and cables. His shoulder pressed against the boom's internal structure, the metal edge cutting into his arm. He disconnected the aileron cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin, dropped it, heard it bounce somewhere deep in the boom, spent 4 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was hammering. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face court-martial. Dishonorable discharge, prison time maybe, but Jensen was going to die if Brennan didn't do something. He inserted the tensioner between the cable end and the pulley junction, reconnected everything. The fit was tight, had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable, no slack. The aileron moved immediately, crisply. Perfect. Brennan replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off his hands, walked out of the hangar at 01:30. The tropical night was still and humid. Somewhere in the distance he heard aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders, probably. He'd just violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Jensen would crash and Brennan would be responsible. But if it worked, Jensen might live. Brennan went to his tent, didn't sleep, watched the canvas ceiling until dawn. At 06:45, he walked to the flight line, watched the ground crew fuel and arm Jensen's Lightning, watched Jensen walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 07:42, Jensen took off. Brennan stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky, watched it join formation with 11 other Lightnings, watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace. Then all he could do was wait. Have you ever broken the rules to save someone's life? Tell us in the comments what you would have done in Brennan's position. The engagement started at 08:19. Jensen's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 7 Zeros at 12,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind the American, perfect setup for a bounce. Jensen was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the attack. They rolled in hot. Jensen picked a 0 at the back of the enemy formation, dove from altitude, building speed to 370 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. He could see the red meatball painted on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. 450 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon opened up. Tracers reached out. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the 0's left wing route. Not enough. The 0 snap-rolled right and dove hard. Jensen rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The aircraft responded instantly. No delay, no lag. The stick moved and the lightning rolled immediately, crisply, like the airplane had been waiting for his command. Jensen had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like flying a different aircraft entirely. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time, got his nose down. The 0 was right there, filling his gun sight. He fired again. 2-second burst. The rounds walked up the 0's fuselage from tail to engine. The aircraft exploded. Pieces tumbled through the sky trailing smoke and flame. Jensen's first kill, but there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out more 0's diving from above. Jensen looked up, saw 4 of them coming down in a shallow dive, coming fast. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running, to use speed and altitude like the doctrine said. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left and pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced before. The nose came through the horizon, fast, smooth. He saw the lead 0. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Jensen to. Reverse that quickly. The 0 was in a bad position, exposed. Jensen pulled lead, fired, hit the 0 in the left wing route. The wing folded, the aircraft tumbled. 2 kills in 40 seconds. The other 3 0's tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Jensen stayed with them. Every time they reversed, his lightning snapped into the turn instantly, crisply. No delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. 1 0 made a mistake, reversed too hard, bled too much energy. Jensen got inside his turn. Close range, maybe 200 feet. He fired. The 0 came apart mid-air. Pieces of aircraft tumbled past Jensen's canopy. 3 kills. The 4th 0 ran. Jensen didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what remained of his flight, headed home. The entire engagement lasted 6 minutes. When Jensen landed at Dobodura at 0911, Brennan was waiting on the flight line. Jensen shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit. His flight suit was soaked with sweat, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. He walked straight to Brennan, said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 4 other pilots had watched Jensen's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group, experienced, smart. He'd been watching Jensen's element engage the 0's below when he noticed something unusual. Jensen's P-38 was rolling faster than any lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in theatre, knew their skill levels. Jensen was good but not exceptional. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Jensen in the debriefing room. Jensen was still wired on adrenaline, filling out his combat report with shaking hands. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked what was different. Jensen said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Jensen said he should talk to Staff Sergeant Brennan. Mitchell found Brennan in the maintenance area 2 hours later. Brennan was working on a different P-38, hands black with grease, coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly what he'd done to Jensen's airplane. Brennan looked at him for a long moment, then told him everything. The cable slack, the tensioner, the unauthorized modification. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When Brennan finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. Brennan said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 3 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape from. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, Brennan modified Mitchell's P-38. Same cable tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning, came back raving about the improvement, told his wingman the airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a freight train. The wingman wanted the modification too. By August 18th, Brennan had modified 14 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron like wildfire. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. Brennan showed them how. Cut the cable, bend it into an S shape, install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 12 minutes, changes everything. The modification spread quietly, pilot to pilot, mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversation in ready rooms and maintenance hangars. Jensen shot down 2 more Zeros on August 24th using the modified controls. Mitchell got 4 on August 27th. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills, with stories of lightnings that suddenly handled like real fighters. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Wallace was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Port Moresby. He heard about the modification from a pilot who'd transferred from Dobodura. Wallace was skeptical, but tried it on 1 aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 9 weeks of combat. Wallace modified 6 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 50 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed something was different, but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every Zero destroyed. In August, it was 1.4 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed, but officially, nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Intelligence reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. Tactics that had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces, 58 confirmed kills. On September 7th, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the lightning to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with a him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly, but this lightning rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him for 2 seconds, put 3 rounds through Sakai's right wing. Sakai had to dive away, bleeding speed and altitude. He returned to base confused and shaken. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently, weren't using new tactics, but their aircraft were responding faster, fractionally, but enough to matter, enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modification. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. What they didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom, an 8-inch piece of bent steel cable that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 41 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 24 aircraft. The ratio had reversed, and it all came down to an 8-inch piece of bent cable that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943 when a maintenance inspector at Port Moresby noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the cable tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 4 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, but it was working. Fighter squadrons using it had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the forces, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion: the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. But Brennan never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to internal engineering analysis. Brennan's name didn't appear anywhere. Jensen survived the war. He flew 71 combat missions, shot down 13 Japanese aircraft, returned to California in 1945. He married his high school sweetheart, had 3 children, worked as a commercial pilot for Western Airlines for 32 years. Every year, on August 12th, Jensen called Brennan to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, shot down 19 aircraft, stayed in the Air Force after the war, retired as a colonel in 1962. He told the story of Brennan's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. Brennan stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, went back to working on cars, opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1949. He worked on engines for 40 years, never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes, that's all. In 1992, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the cable tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down Brennan through veteran registries. Brennan was 71 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. Brennan confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 70 and 90 American pilots' lives based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. Brennan said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Jensen, Mitchell, Wallace, the others. That was enough. Thomas Brennan died in 2007 at age 86. He was buried at Riverside National Cemetery in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the cable tensioner, did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew, did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there. Different owner now. But on the wall in the back office, there's a faded photograph. A young sergeant in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning, a wrench in one hand. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees, through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives.